The year was 1854. The sun was dipping below the horizon of the Atlantic, painting the Maine coastline in shades of deep lavender and burnt orange. If you were standing on the jagged rocks of Cape Elizabeth back then, the only sound you would hear was the rhythmic, repetitive hush of the cold waves against the granite. There were no sirens, no buzzing phones, no distant hum of highways, just the wind, carrying the faint scent of salt and pine needles. In this era, America was a patchwork of local times. Every town set its own clock by the high noon of the sun. When it was 12:00 p.m. in Boston, it might be 11:48 a.m. in Worcester. It was a slow, meditative way of living, where time was as fluid as the tides. Elias Thorne lived in the center of this stillness. Elias was a lighthouse keeper, a man of quiet habits and steady hands. His home was a circular stone tower, whitewashed and sturdy, standing like a silent sentinel against the vast, dark ocean. For Elias, history wasn't something written in books. It was something he felt in the temperature of the brass lantern and the weight of the kerosene cans. American history often talks about the gold rush or the coming of the railroads, but it rarely whispers about the men like Elias. He was part of the United States Lighthouse Board, an organization established just 2 years prior, in 1852. Before this, the lighthouses of the U.S. were in a state of dim neglect. But the mid-19th century brought a new obsession with precision. Elias's job was simple yet profound. Keep the light burning. But it wasn't just any light. He was one of the first to operate the Fresnel lens, a masterpiece of glass engineering from France. Close your eyes and imagine that lens. It was a giant beehive of crystal prisms, polished to a mirror-like shine. It didn't just hold a flame. It gathered every stray beam of light and bent it, focused it, and threw it miles out into the dark Atlantic. To Elias, cleaning those prisms was a ritual. He used a soft chamois cloth, moving in slow, circular motions. Swish, swish, swish. The sound was hypnotic, a soft friction that felt like the breathing of the tower itself. A low, metallic thrum that echoed upward. 72 steps. He counted them every night, not because he had to, but because the rhythm anchored him. In the 1850s, the American landscape was still largely a mystery to its own people. Beyond the Mississippi, the Great Plains stretched out like a sea of grass. But here, on the East Coast, the wilderness was being tamed by the Coast Survey. This was a time when the U.S. government was obsessed with mapping every nook and cranny of the shoreline. Elias would sit in his small wooden chair at the top of the gallery, looking out at the shipping lanes. To an American in 1854, the ocean was the primary highway. Great clipper ships with their towering white sails moved like ghosts in the moonlight. They were carrying tea from China, silk from India, and news from the distant ports of Europe. He often thought about the time ball in Washington, D.C. You see, back then, the U.S. Naval Observatory would drop a large black ball at exactly noon every day. It was the first attempt to synchronize America. Elias had a heavy brass chronometer, a gift from a retired sea captain. He treated that clock like a living thing. Every morning, he wound it. The tension of the spring was a promise that the day would follow a predictable path. Stove. Elias would spend his evenings writing in his logbook. In the 1850s, Americans used quill pens, or early dip pens. The scratching of the nib on the thick, fibrous paper was a small, dusty sound. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. He recorded the weather. Wind from the northeast. Sea calm. Light burning bright. There is something deeply soothing about the way history moved in those days. There was no breaking news. If a ship arrived from England, the news was already 2 weeks old. This delay created a sense of patience that we have lost today. Americans back then understood the beauty of waiting. They waited for the harvest, they waited for the mail, and they waited for the stars to align so they could navigate the globe. That described every rock and shoal from Maine to Florida. He read it by the light of a small whale oil lamp. The flame would flicker slightly in the draft, casting long, dancing shadows of the rocking chair against the stone walls. The terminology he used was purely American. Heave to, starboard, the nor'easter. He thought about the pioneers heading west in covered wagons, the prairie schooners. While they were navigating the dirt trails of the Oregon Trail, Elias was guiding their counterparts through the watery trails of the Atlantic. He read it by the light of a small whale oil lamp. The flame would flicker slightly in the draft, casting long, dancing shadows of the rocking chair against the stone walls. The terminology he used was purely American. Heave to, starboard, the nor'easter. He thought about the pioneers heading west in covered wagons, the prairie schooners. While they were navigating the dirt trails of the Oregon Trail, Elias was guiding their counterparts through the watery trails of the Atlantic. Commonly in the U.S., lard oil, before kerosene became the standard. It had a thick, heavy viscosity. Elias had to pump the oil up to the burner. Thump, hiss, thump, hiss. The pump had a steady cadence. It was the heartbeat of the coast. If the light went out, the silence would be broken by the tragedy of a ship hitting the lee shore. But Elias never let it go out. He was a master of the wick trimming. To trim a wick meant to cut away the charred part so the flame would burn clean and blue. He used wick trimming shears, heavy ornate scissors. Snip. The sound was sharp and satisfying. As the 1850s transitioned into the 1860s, the world began to change. The telegraph wires were being strung across the American landscape. For the first time, information could travel faster than a horse. This was the beginning of the end for the isolated, slow world Elias loved. But inside the lighthouse, time stood still. The stars above Maine were brighter then. Without the light pollution of modern cities, the Milky Way looked like a spilled bucket of silver cream across the black velvet sky. Elias knew the constellations by their old names. He watched the Big Dipper rotate slowly around the North Star.